Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today in class, it kind of depends on which period you were in, what we got up to in class. Unfortunately, third period we had the lockdown drill, so we really didn't get very far. So we're going to start a little bit earlier. We're going to skip ahead through, everybody got through most of the unwritten Constitution. Uh, some of you got all the way up to Hamilton's economic plan, but many of you, I think third period we only got up to like introducing the political parties. So this is actually a very important topic. So this is kind of what I want to start with you guys. Make sure that we understand the development of the political parties. So the first thing you want to understand, the first two political parties, and I would take very good notes on this. This sets up the next, I would say 25 years of history in our class. You have to understand the development of political parties, their different ideologies, what they stand for. So when you look at the first two political parties are the Federalists and a party known as the Democratic Republicans. Now, the Democratic Republicans earlier in history were known as the Anti-Federalists, and they kind of changed their name to the Democratic Republicans. So what do these two political parties stand for? First, let's talk about the Federalist Party. So the Federalist Party stands for, number one, a strong centralized government. So they want a stronger government, just like the Federalists during the ratification debate. Two, however, the change here after the Constitution gets implemented is that the Federalists stand for a certain interpretation of the Constitution. So they're going to stand for what's known as a loose or a broad interpretation of the Constitution. And the name that they call them is they would call them a loose constructionist or a broad constructionist. Now, where do they get this interpretation from? They get it from Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. So the part of this that you want to make sure you emphasize, this is known as the Necessary and Proper Clause, and it's also known as the Elastic Clause. And what it essentially does is this is their constitutional proof that yes, you can interpret the Constitution broadly or loosely, and the federal government can expand its power when necessary. So the example I gave you guys in class is the rubber band example. Let me see if I have a rubber band here. Yeah, so, basically a rubber band is stretchy, right? It stretches, it moves. They kind of view the Constitution as flexible as far as it's like an elastic document that you can expand the power of the federal government when necessary, and you can kind of constrict it when necessary. And so this allows the federal government to be more powerful, to do things that it doesn't explicitly state. Because in the Constitution, it explicitly gives powers to Congress, it explicitly gives powers to the president. These are kind of like powers that you can kind of almost imply, that aren't explicitly stated but are kind of implied that are given to the federal government. Now, on the other hand, you have the Democratic Republicans. So I'll make a column on the other side for the Democratic Republicans. They are advocates of a weaker central government. They inherit those ideas of the anti-federalists who are arguing against the Constitution earlier in history. And they're very concerned about personal liberty, personal freedoms. And the anti-federalists are who get the Bill of Rights added to the Constitution. So when the Constitution is then passed later on, you have these people who are still weary of too strong of a central government. They inherit that country ideology from colonial America, and they're going to end up being strict constructionists, which means they're advocates more of states' rights, and they believe very strongly that if it's not explicitly stated in the Constitution, then the federal government does not have the right to exercise that power. So I'm going to say that again. For Democratic Republicans, it has to be explicitly stated in the Constitution for the federal government to be able to exercise that right. And so they again also look to the Constitution, to the Bill of Rights part of the Constitution, to defend their position. So it's important that they're both using this document to defend their position. It's almost kind of like a legal battle. Like lawyers use the law to defend their position. They're using the Constitution to defend their position. So the part of the Constitution that they use is the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment, basically what it states here is that if the power is not given to the federal government, in this case they use the United States as the example of the federal government, that's what they mean, that it's reserved for the states. meaning all other powers are state powers. If it's not written in this document given to the federal government, it's a state power. So this, in essence, is a very important discussion, a very important debate, because it's going to dictate American politics. You can argue that it dictates American politics for the next, all the way up to the Civil War. They're constantly arguing about states' rights versus the central government. What powers does the central government have? What powers do the states have? So it definitely plays a role in Washington's administration, and it definitely plays a role going forward. So I would just stop the video here and just make sure that you have a good understanding of this, that if you have to, you go back and you watch to kind of re-explain the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans' positions as the first two political parties, because they are very substantial and they are very important, and it sets the groundwork for understanding American politics really up until the Civil War. So it's a fundamental idea that you have to understand to kind of understand American politics and early American society. Okay, so with that being said, the thing that the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists are really going to argue about is going to be the economic plan of Alexander Hamilton. So Alexander Hamilton, as we learned, he's a very strong little person, very strong personality. He's financially savvy, and that's how he ends up being the Secretary of the Treasury. And he comes up with an economic plan, but his economic plan is very much a federalist economic plan, and that's important to understand. It strengthens the central government. He really has two objectives here with his economic plan. So you want to make sure you write down both of these objectives that Hamilton has. He first and foremost wants to address the economic problems of the country. Remember, all of those economic problems they're facing post-Revolutionary War, the inflation, the trouble paying back the debt, problem with veterans, paying back veterans, hard money versus soft money with the printed paper money. All of those issues carry over, right? They were carried into the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation couldn't address those problems. Really, the first major task of Washington and of Alexander Hamilton is to address the economic problems of the era. It's huge. It is the problem of the era. So it's given, basically the task is given to Hamilton as to kind of write advice to Congress on, like, hey, this is what we should do. We should try and fix the country this way. Okay? So when you look at Hamilton's economic plan, that's his first objective, is to fix the country's economic state, to try and get it moving in the right track. And he's going to try and work with Congress to do this. Second thing, though, kind of a secondary objective, because Hamilton is such an advocate for kind of a stronger central government, he is a strong federalist, Hamilton is also going to try and strengthen the federal government through his economic plan. So we're going to try and analyze his economic plan in these two ways. One, how is it trying to attempt to fix the economy and to address the problems that carry over from the Articles of Confederation post-American Revolution? And then two, how is this making the central government stronger? So when you look at the first part of Hamilton's financial plan, the first part of Hamilton's financial plan is the assumption of state debt. So Hamilton, what's going on here is each state, just like the federal government is in debt itself, okay? So that carries over from the Articles of Confederation. Just because we change governments doesn't mean that the U.S. government is not still in debt. The debt carries over, right? Now, each individual state in the Union is also in debt, okay? And they owe money to various different people. They owe it to wealthy citizens in America. They owe it to foreign countries as well. Now, the issue here is that they owe debt. Each state owes a different level of debt. It's not all equal. Now, Hamilton proposes and is able to eventually convince Congress to pass legislation to do this, that the federal government should assume all of the states' debts, meaning the federal government should take on the debt, let's say, of Georgia, take on the debt of North Carolina, of New York, of Massachusetts, and they assume all of the debts of the states. Now, Hamilton wants to do this because he thinks that, number one, it'll be easier for the federal government to manage this and pay it back, and two, essentially it's going to make the federal government stronger. It's not New York individually paying back their debt, or New Jersey paying back their debt, or Delaware paying back their debt. It's the U.S. government paying back their debt. And we're all kind of in this problem, this debt problem together. It's no longer a state by state issue. We all kind of have vested interest in the federal government succeeding and the federal government paying off their debt. Okay, so those are the two things he's thinking about. Second thing he's going to kind of put in there that he says is important is that we should place an excise tax on whiskey. Now, again, this is specifically designed to pay off your debt of the era. Essentially, the debt, this is a different way of kind of taxing the people. The American people don't want to be taxed. Now we're taxed on like income and we're taxed on our property. In this era, this is the way that they wanted to try and tax to make money back for the debt was really to either put a tax on an item, a product like whiskey, or to do an import-export tax. Now, if you think about this, this is going to raise some red flags for your anti-federalists because think about what happened under Britain. Isn't this exactly what Britain did? Didn't they tax tea? Didn't they tax sugar? Isn't this the same kind of thing that they're doing? So Hamilton, this is solely designed really to raise revenue. Think about the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act's name in British Parliament was the Revenue Act. So it's basically the same kind of concept here. And this is strengthening the federal government because it's giving them the power to tax. And think back to the Articles. They lack the power to tax. So this is directly addressing an economic concern. And it's also, again, strengthening the powers of the federal government, or at least showing that the federal government is more powerful than they were under the Articles. Okay, third thing, put a big star next to this one. This is what creates a huge debate in America, the creation of the Bank of the United States. So it's abbreviated the BUS, B-U-S, the Bank of the United States. This is a central bank for the country. And essentially, the central bank can do a lot of things. It can take control of the money situation in the country. Remember, there's multiple currencies floating out there in the United States. It can manage the money of America. For example, the federal government can use this as a place to hold its money, its tax revenue, and it can help with the consolidation process of the debt. Now, this becomes super contentious and a huge debate in American history because essentially the bank, they're very fearful that the bank is going to become too powerful, and it's going to be too powerful. It's too much power centrally located in one specific place in a financial institution, and a lot of people are going to be nervous about this. Now, Hamilton's not. Hamilton's a federalist. He thinks this is necessary. You have to have a strong central government. You have to get the finances of the country running under one establishment to kind of fix the problems of the nation because the economic problems are too great. All right, the last thing that he tries to do, and he wants to try and do this through creating tariffs. Hamilton is very big into creating tariffs on imported products. Now, what I would call this is a protectionist tariff that Hamilton really wants to be placed on products coming into the United States. And what I mean by that is it's a protectionist tariff to protect American manufacturing. His goal here is to try and get America to move into a more industrial society because he views that as the way to the wave of the future to kind of compete. And he doesn't want America to be reliant on foreign goods. Specifically at the time, we're reliant on British products. We're importing British products because it's a holdover from mercantilism. And Hamilton wants to use this tariff to kind of stop the British from flooding America with these cheap manufactured goods. And it'll give American manufacturing a chance to build itself up and then to compete with the British and compete with the Europeans. So he tries to do this, and again, putting a tax on foreign products, again, that's a power they didn't have under the Articles. They didn't have the power to put a tariff, and it also shows the strength of the federal government. Okay, this activity you guys are going to do as your activity that goes along with our screencast, so we'll kind of skip over this. We'll come back to it later. Now, not all of Hamilton's financial plan goes over smoothly. Like I said, Democratic Republicans are going to be really upset about certain aspects of it. The central bank they don't like. They really don't like any of it. And Jefferson's going to kind of lead the charge against a lot of Hamilton's financial plan. So you have to remember, all this is happening inside of Washington's cabinet. Now, outside in the American society, there are people who are not happy with these financial things either. And so one of them that gets actually some armed rebellion and armed resistance is the whiskey tax. So there's going to be a rebellion that breaks out in basically western Pennsylvania called the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, this is significant for a couple of different reasons. So first of all, they're attacking this tax. They're upset about the tax that Hamilton's put in place. Now, this disproportionately affects people in the western parts of states in that, original 13 states. So like western Pennsylvania, the western parts of the southern states. Now, the reason for that is they can't really grow these major cash crops, and it's too costly to ship the goods or to transport the goods by horse and wagon to the east. So essentially, the only way you're going to get like a nice bang for your buck here is if you turn it into alcohol, into whiskey. And so it kind of disproportionately affects certain parts of the country. So again, so the first significant thing about this is that you're again seeing that division that's a holdover from colonial America, that western backcountry division and the coastal elite. The backcountry, this is a backcountry rebellion. The people of western Pennsylvania are going to be upset about the whiskey tax. They feel like it's unfairly targeting them. And so what they're going to do is they're going to try and have a rebellion against the tax. And again, just like Shays' Rebellion, like Bacon's Rebellion, they're going to take up arms, try and go after what they see as, the government officials of their state. Now, this one, it's not really a major rebellion. By the time troops arrive, and troops arrive pretty quick to put this down, the leaders of the rebellion are really basically nowhere to be found and to be nowhere really in the vicinity. Now, what's important about this is the reaction that it gets from the federal government, because this is important. George Washington, our commander-in-chief president, sees this as an opportunity to send a message to not just the people who are a part of the Whiskey Rebellion, but Americans in general, that this is not going to be tolerated under the Constitution, under the new American government. So he actually sends about 10,000 troops to Pennsylvania to put down the rebellion. Now, when you think about that, that's about double the size of the Continental Army, the official Continental Army that Washington was commanding during the American Revolution. So he really wants to send a message here. He wants to send a message that the Constitution is powerful, that we do have a military, that things like Shays' Rebellion and things that were happening under the Articles are not acceptable, and they're not going to happen here under our new government, under the Constitution. Okay? So essentially, this is a good example of expansion of the federal government and power of the federal government. And that is the question of the day, and that is the important thing to think about, is what power should be given to the central government, what power should be given to the states, how far is too far, what's necessary for the federal government, and what's not necessary for the federal government, to implement. Okay, guys, so this is going to be your activity. You're going to have to think like a Democratic Republican. You're going to try and analyze Hamilton's financial plan from a Democratic Republican's perspective. And this is going to kind of help you for our debate that we're going to be doing next week.